is quite a history of giants in Tennessee. Let's start with this from denvermichaels.net, The Giants of Ancient Tennessee, where he writes that in about the year 1814, Mr. Lawrence found in Scarsborough Cave, which is the one on Catfiller River, a branch of the Caney Fork, about 12 to 15 miles from Sparta, in a little room in the cave, many human bones of monstrous size. Human bones were taken out of the mound on Tennessee River below Kingston, 2 miles from Nashville, and the jaw bones of a man which easily covered the whole chin and jaw of Colonel Lewis, a man of large size. Some years afterwards, Mr. Cassidy dug up a skeleton from under a small mound near the large one at Blesdo Lick in Sumner County, which measured a little short of 7 feet high in length. Human bones have been dug up on the plantation where Judge Overton now lives in Davidson County, 4 miles southwest from Nashville, making a cellar. At the plantation of Mr. William Shepard in the county of Giles, 11.5 miles from Pulaski, on the east side of the creek, is a cave with several rooms. At the mouth of Obed River, on point between Cumberland River, is high ground. Certain persons in digging struck a little below the surface 4 stones standing upright, and so placed in relation to each other as forms a square box, was enclosed a skeleton placed on its feet in an erect posture, and it was found to be 8 feet in length. From irreferenceddesk.com, resources, Early State History, Tennessee. It says, the prominent early Indian tribes of Tennessee were the Cherokee and the Chickasaw. The Chickasaws claimed most of western Tennessee as their hunting grounds, and the Cherokee claimed the southern part, the southeastern Tennessee, and northeast Georgia as their homestead. The tradition of the Choctaws told of a race of giants that once inhabited the now state of Tennessee, and with whom their ancestors fought when they arrived in Mississippi in their migration from the west. The tradition states the Nahulo race of giants was of wonderful stature. Several Native American tribes have passed down legends of a race of white giants who were wiped out. So when I researched who were the earliest people to inhabit Tennessee, this must be from Wikipedia, it said that 15,000 years ago, when the last of the Ice Age glaciers retreated, early man hunted mastodon that roamed during the last ice age. And then it says that from 700 AD to 1300 AD was the Mississippian period. The peak of prehistoric cultural development in Tennessee occurred during the Mississippian period. And if you'll notice, that period of high peak development ended in 1300, which was a very important date in early North American history because it's the date when the Anasazi disappeared. And basically from 1300 to 1600, all over the United States and Mexico, is when the Spaniards and Europeans arrived, and they were the cause of the end of the mound builder civilization, because apparently it was thriving when the Europeans arrived. When they abruptly ended, it was because of the Europeans, whether it was from intentional war or European diseases, or they went into hiding. That was what caused the end of this ancient civilization of mound builders that lasted for thousands of years. This is just so fascinating that I have to read it directly. So here we go. The American Naturalist, April 1869, Joseph Jones. The Aboriginal Mound Builders of Tennessee. When the first Anglo-American pioneers about the middle of the last century explored the country east and north of the Tennessee River, the territory between the Ohio, Tennessee rivers was a vast unoccupied wilderness. The rich valleys, hills, and plains of Tennessee and Kentucky were crowded with a dense growth of forest and trees, and formed an extensive park held permanently only by the beasts of the forests, and abounding with immense herds of buffalo, wild flocks of wild turkeys, droves of deer, and innumerable bears. The nearest permanent Indian settlements were on the Scotia and the Miami of the north, on the waters of the Little Tennessee on the south, and from these points the warriors of the Miami Confederacy on the north, and the Choctaws, Chickasaws and Cherokees on the south issued to engage in hunting and war in this great central theater. And at this period, by common agreement of all surrounding tribes, this section of the country, for its fertile soil, numerous rivers, abundant supply of fish and games, was admirably adapted to the settlement of savage tribes, appear to have been reserved from permanent occupancy. Admirably adapted to the settlement of savage tribes, appear to have been reserved from permanent occupancy. That this country, in common with the other portions of Great Valley of Mississippi, was inhabited by ancient times by a comparatively dense population who subsisted by the arts of husbandry as well as by the chase, is evident from the numerous depositories of the dead in the caves and along the banks of the streams in the fertile valleys and around the cool springs which abound in this limestone region, and from the imposing monumental remains and extensive earthworks. A considerable portion of the city of Nashville has been built over an extensive Indian graveyard, which lay along the valley of the Lick Branch. A large portion of these graves have been removed in the building of the North Nashville. In the section of the city, I saw numerous stone graves exposed during the digging of these cellars of rows of houses, and obtained a small stone hatchet and other implement of hard silicious stone, beautifully polished. This stone implement is supposed to have been used in the dressing of hides. All around the sulphur springs, traces of the aborigines are manifest in the form of fragments of large pots and various extensive fortifications several miles in extent, enclosing two systems of mounds and numerous stone graves, lie along the Big Harpeth, about 16 miles below Old Town. Okay, what is all this? An extensive burying ground lies on the opposite bank of the Cumberland, directly across from the mouth of Lick Branch, and another about 1.5 miles lower down, another at Cockrell Springs, 2.5 miles from Sulphur Springs, another 6 miles from Nashville on the Charlotte Pike, and still another at Haysboro. Numerous stone graves are also found on White Creeks and the Dickerson Pike, 9 miles from Nashville, and at Sycamore, 22 miles from Nashville, on the plantation of the Colonel Overton, and in and around Brentwood, and at Boiling Springs, and on the plantation of Mr. Scales. Extensive Indian burying grounds are also found in White County near Sparta, and along various streams flowing into the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers at Harpeth Duck, Elk, and Stone Rivers, and along the plantation General de Graffengrade. 2.5 miles from Franklin, numerous stone graves are found within an extensive earthwork which appears to have been surrounded a considerable Indian town. One large square mound, 230 feet in diameter, together with a chain of smaller ones, are found within the ancient fortification with mounds and stone graves. One of the most remarkable stone grave burying grounds found on the west fork of Big Harpeth, 6.5 miles from Franklin, at a place called Old Town, on the property of Thomas Brown. Mound Bottom and over Osborne's Place. At these extensive fortifications, which enclose the sites of two ancient cities, are found 3 pyramidal mounds, about 50 feet in elevation, and each one containing an acre upon its summit, and besides these, numerous lesser mounds. Such structures must have required the labor of a considerable population for a series of years, and more especially the erection of these earth pyramids must have been slow and tedious, as these aborigines were without horses or carts, and the immense mass of earth must have been carried by hand in baskets and in skins. The old road or trail which connected these two ancient cities cannot be discerned in the forest, the well-worn way being in stone places at foot or more beneath the general surface. Wow. It is evident from these facts that a chain of fortified cities and towns extended in ancient days all along Big Harpeth, and from careful excavations and examinations and comparisons of the crania and relics, we are convinced that they were all erected by the same race. One of the most remarkable aboriginal remains in Tennessee is found at Fort Duck River near Manchester and is known as the Stone Fort. The walls of the fort have formed of loose rock and stones gathered from a bed of the river. The gateway and the fort, which opens toward the neck of the land between the two branches of the river, is carefully protected by the inner line of works so constructed that the enemy entering the fort would be received in a blind pouch or bag. Directly in front of the gateway of the fort and about a half a mile distant stand a remarkable mound, the structure of which is similar to that of the walls of the fort, being composed of rocks, none of the which exceeded a foot and a half in diameter. This oblong mound, 600 feet in circumference and 40 feet in height, and the labor of collecting and depositing all the loose rocks by hand must have been considerable. It would be impossible for us upon the present occasion to enter a minute description of the mounds of Tennessee. They are found upon the Cumberland, Little Tennessee, Big Tennessee, French Broad, Elk River, Harpeth, Duck, and Stone Rivers. As a general rule, these mounds are erected upon rich alluvial bottoms and are either surrounded by an extensive earthworks or are located in the neighborhood of these fortifications, which mark the site of the town. The mounds vary in number and size and measure with the extent and the richness of the valleys and the size of the earthworks. The smallest are not more than a few feet high and about 30 feet in diameter, while the largest attain a height of 70 feet and cover an acre or two of ground. Many of the smaller mounds were used for the burial of the dead, other purpose of the religious burning of the dead, while the large pyramid mounds were mostly probably sites and temples, councilhood of the Aborigines. Well, the ancient inhabitants of Tennessee also left singular paintings on the rocks representing the sun and moon. These paintings occupy the face of perpendicular cliffs on the Harpeth, Tennessee, French Broad, Duck, and Cumberland rivers. The paintings are executed with red ochre upon high, inaccessible walls of rock overhanging the water, and were without doubt devoted to sacred purposes and were emblematic of the sun, the god of the Aborigines. We have still another evidence of the existence of a numerous population in the fact that these first settlers found the caves filled with human skeletons. Haywood relates that in the spring of the year 1811, 2 human beings were found in a copperous cave in Warren County in West Tennessee, about 15 miles southwest from Sparta and 20 miles from McMinnville. One of these persons was a male, the other female. They were entered in baskets made of cane, curiously wrought and evidencing great mechanical skill. They were both dislocated at the hip and joint and were placed erect in the baskets, which, with a covering of cane, made to fit the baskets which they were placed. The flesh of these persons was an entire undecayed of a brown color produced by time, the flesh having adhered to the bones and the sinews. Around the female next to her body was placed a well-dressed doeskin. Next to this was placed a rug, very curiously wrought of the bark and tree of feathers. The bark seemed to have been formed of small strands well twisted around each of these strands. Feathers were rolled, and the whole woven into a cloth fine texture, coarse fabric. This rug, 3 feet wide, between 6 and 7 feet in length. The whole of the ligaments thus formed the bark and were completely covered by the feathers, forming the body about 1/8 of an inch thickness and 1/4 inch the strand. Appearance was highly diversified by green, blue, yellow, black, presenting different shades of color when reflected on by the light in different positions. The next covering was an undressed deerskin. Whew. The hair of these mummies was still remaining upon their heads and was of a yellow cast and a very fine texture. De Soto, in March of his 1539 and 1540, saw great numbers of similar feathered mantles. The Mexicans at the time of the Spanish conquest were clad in similar garments. The tribe of the Indians inhabiting the immense territory called by the Spaniards Florida, embracing the country indefinite extent bordering the Gulf of Mexico and including a large portion of the valley of the Mississippi and the present states of Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and the middle of the western portion of Tennessee, were more highly civilized and farther advanced than those of the northern regions, that they worshiped the sun and were governed by despotic princes cultivated in the soil, and had made these advanced arts and their manners and customs. All religion pointed to Mexico as their native country, or vice versa. The population was much greater at the time of the invasion of De Soto than it is at any subsequent period. Large armies were frequently arrayed against him. In Potosa, Florida, he was furnished with 700 burden bearers. In acute Georgia, he was supplied with 200 of these Indian servants, and at Cafec, bloody battles by thousands. They were worn, they were hunted down bloodhounds. Diseases thin out the population. Constant bloody wars afterwards. Engaged to a great extent, grew, still farther reduced the numbers. The town, less reverential than those made to the sun and moon. Similar customs prevailed along the west bank of this great river. In the morning, every Indian presented himself at one entrance of the cabin and extended his hands towards the sun. And to the setting sun he bestowed upon them during the day, and were particularly careful that his last ray should not strike their heads. On the sides of the wall were large benches in which sat boxes containing the deceased chiefs and the families. 3 rows of chests full of valuable pearls occupied the middle of the temple, bound with beautiful garments manufactured out of the skins of various animals and in the most splendid mantles of feathers. Upon route through Alabama and the neighboring states, found the temples full of human bones, while their heads were shielded from the sun by shades made from feathers or hides, painted hides. The most important conclusion we draw from these investigations is the race which created the erect mounds fortifications of Tennessee was existing and active at the time of the discovery of North America, and possessed the country with a numerous population even as late as the exploration of De Soto. This conclusion, which is at variance with the theories propounded by various ethnologists of Europe and America, who assign a considerable period of this extinction of the mound builders, will still be farther sustained by the remarkable discovery which we have made during the progress of these investigations of the cross emblems of the Christian religion, especially the sign of the Trinity, Savior, and Mary in the mounds of Tennessee, which we believe that the preceding conclusion is based upon incontrovertible facts and evidence. We will proceed to consider to the next place the burial practice of the Aboriginal Tennessees as shown by the sacred and sacrificial mounds and stone graves. The ancient race of Tennessee buried their dead in rude stone confection sarcophagi constructed of a flat piece of stone, and abounds Tennessee, and extensive graveyards. And herein is describing the inhabitants of the Yucatan, saying they flattened their heads and foreheads. Their ears were bored with rings in them. Their hair was long like women and in tresses, which they made a garland about the head, and a little tail hung behind. The most important and interesting result in the entire series of investigations is the discovery of undoubted symbols of the Catholic religion in the stone graves and mounds of Tennessee. In a stone grave in a small mound within an extensive fortification on the banks of the Big Harpeth River, 2 miles from Franklin, on the plantation, 4 copper crosses were exhumed, resting upon the skull of an old Indian. The copper had stained the bones of the cranium a deep green color. In their general outline of these 2 crosses presented a contour of the human figure. The crosses appear to have been stamped upon the copper plates with a die. This grave also contained the remarkable vase fashioned in little crushed river shells and blah, blah, blah. In several of the crania, the os inca characteristic of the Peruvian skulls was observed, that this ancient race were descended from the Toltecs and were probably a branch of the Natchez is rendered probable not only from the conformation of the crania, but also from the history of this once powerful but now extinct nation of the Natchez. Has the arms crossed upon the breast in the attitude of prayer, the crown upon the head has 3 prominences, the hatchet has 3 marks upon his head, and the beautiful shell ornament from the same mound has the symbol of the Trinity upon both the anterior and posterior surfaces. These religious relics are of great interest in their bearing upon the probable date of the mound and temples and graves in which they are found, and the proof which they afford that the inhabitants of America have, at various times, come in contact with the civilization and religions of Europe, even before the recognized era of the discovery and exploration of the American continent. The jaw under the old Indian whose grave lay near this idol was of remarkable size. There we go. Okay, let's read that again. The underjaw of the old Indian whose grave lay near this idol was of remarkable size, and had only 1 long sharp fang, like tooth of a wild animal. What? On the left of the grave of the priestess of the sun lay 2 other most carefully constructed graves, one of which numerous beads were found enclosing or encircling various portions of the skeleton, and in the other a large sea conch. From the nature of the ornament upon the breast, as well as the care which the sarcophagus had been constructed, we judged that this was the priestess of the sun. In the grave of a child near the right of the grave, priest of the sun, at the foot of the grave, a gigantic old Indian, 7 feet in length, and of great age, as manifested by the loss of teeth and the absorption of the alveoli. A curious small black idol was exhumed. The grave of a gigantic old Indian, 7 feet in length, and of great age. Here, as elsewhere, the graves were of various sizes, from that just sufficient to enclose the remains of a little child up to the long stone coffin of 8 feet. In a large and carefully constructed stone tomb, the lid of which was formed of a flat rock over 7 feet in length and 3 feet wide, I exhumed the bones of what was supposed to have been an ancient Indian chief who had passed his 100 summers. The skeleton was about 7 feet in length, and the huge jaws had lost every vestige of teeth the alveolar possesses, being entirely absorbed. An excavation of the proper size, according to that of the body of the dead, was made in the ground at the bottom. Many of the graves are quite small, only capable of containing the body of a newborn infant. Many of the short, square graves, not more than 18 inches or 2 feet in length, contain the bones of adults piled together. The oldest and lowest graves were of the small square variety, while those near or upon the summit were of the natural length and width of the skeleton within it. Now, when I read that the mound builder artifacts were showing religious symbols found in Christianity, a bell went off in my head, and I thought of some artwork that I saw by the Timucua that looked Catholic in nature, and so I did a search for that image again and found it, and I compared that with some religious European artwork of this rare engraved illustration representation of the dove, Holy Spirit, Christian symbolism engraving from the history and principles and practice of symbolism in Christian art, published in 1891. And the way they line up, it may not be perfect, but there's some kind of synergy and some kind of similarity that's pretty hard to deny when comparing the two. You know, here's my rough trace when I traced the mound builder Timucuan art and put it over the top of the Christian European art. They have a lot of similarities, you have to admit. And they line up very beautifully. I also found a common mound builder symbol was this hand with the eye in it, with the eye on it, and that's called the Hansa hand in India, and it's a very well-known symbol, and it's very common from the ancient times, and it's repeated all over India, and also here with the mound builders in North America. The other comparison, this stone was said to have been found, is the Bat Cave stone in Tennessee, and it lines up basically almost perfectly to these ancient characters that translate to holiness to the Lord. There are giants found in Tennessee. Now we're starting to find the giants actually in the mounds themselves, in stone sarcophagus and stone tombs. One of the well-known articles about giant skeletons found in Tennessee comes from this story, and it says, a giant, a human skeleton said to have been recently discovered in Tennessee, is described by the Nashville Orthopolitan as weighing in the aggregate, the bones being all in perfect state of preservation, 1,500 pounds. There must have been giants surely in those days when these bones were clothed with flesh, for the body which animated the skeleton must have been 18 or 20 feet high and weighed at least 3,000 pounds. The bones of the thigh and leg is asserted measure 6 feet and a half. The cavity of the skull is large enough to hold nearly 2 bushels of brains, and a coffee cup size eye sockets. You don't hear about any of these skeletons being 18 to 20 feet tall. They're always 6 to 8 feet, 9 feet maybe, but mostly in that small range. That's a very small range. And so this isn't sounding very typical to begin with. And as it turns out, further research showed it to be the skull of a mastodon. They saw something like this and mistook it for being a giant human. But usually the skulls, as they describe here, are not able to hold 2 bushels of brains, as they say, but you can usually just put it over the top of a human head. However, that's not the only one coming from Tennessee. Well, this one says 3 huge skeletons of humans found Tennessee discovery made by fishermen digging in Indian Mound in Ripley, Tennessee. Skeletons of 3 gigantic men buried by a forgotten race have been unearthed by a fisherman digging in an old Indian mound near here. Tribal finery in which the bodies were interred was recovered intact. One of the skeletons bore ivory beads, a long ivory ornament. Another was decorated with copper beads, designs of bones and mica. 2 were found near the surface. Farther down was the largest of the skeletons, was discovered in a sitting position on the carpet of ashes. Pottery, one place containing the bones of an infant, was found nearby. It was in fine state of preservation. Indian mound abound in this section, but hitherto none have yielded skeletons the size of these found by the fisherman. He has offered them to the Tennessee Historical Society in Nashville. Unearthed giant with horns. Petrified body found by Tennessee miners is 6 feet and 4 inches long. Workmen of the Keen Strunk Coal Company at Helenwood, Scott County, have found buried in the earth and petrified a giant of 6 feet and 4 inches tall. Embedded in the one-time flesh around his neck is a beautiful chain. The fingers are perfect with long tapering nails. The hands are folded across the breast. On either side of the head are 2 horns, each about 4 inches long. Its weight is about 450 pounds. It is on exhibition in the Hollandwood, where it is being visited by thousands. Prehistoric giant may be an idol. Discovered by coal miner in Tennessee, horned and winged man, now object of much conjecture. Knoxville, Tennessee. Further information as to the petrified body of the gigantic proportions found near Helenwood in Scott County, Tennessee, was received here today. Crew sexton of Helenwood found the devil, as he calls it, on July 20th while prospecting for coal. The formation was 5 feet underground. It weighs something like 500 pounds. The freak is described as having a head of abnormal size adorned by horns resembling those of a ruminant. Its mouth is of unusual size with 24 prominent front teeth. The arms are of unusual length with enormous hands. A chain resembling an ordinary trace chain encircles the neck. Long wings of brownish color reach from the shoulders almost to the plainly visible on the chest. Sexton believes the object may be an image of an old tribe of Indian or cliff dwellers. This is the horned humanoid that they found, petrified, and it was stolen. If you like this video, make sure you're subscribed and don't forget to hit the like for this video. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, bye!